Hi, this is episode 248 of Stand Up. Today, I am joined by my friend, constitutional law scholar and author from Georgia State University, Eric Segall is my guest. Oh, and I am Pete Dominic. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hey, how are you? I am good. In the shed, taping the opening, happy to be in your ears wherever you are. So many people out in nature when they listen to the podcast and send me your pictures, your vitamin N. N stands for nature. I got mine this weekend more than I have in a while. On Friday, it was absolutely beautiful, and so I took the dog for a very long walk in the morning. Fridays, I usually take off because I work on Sundays a lot. And then I brought the dog back. She was so exhausted because we went so far. And I said, I gotta keep walking. And then I went to another park near my house, Rockland State Park, which is absolutely beautiful in Rockland County, just a few minutes from my home. And I met up with my friend Michael Reese, who is a longtime listener, really close friend of mine, helped me build the shed here with Nick DiFabrizio. Michael and I walked the lake together and had a great conversation. It was really great to be with another human being, especially a guy as great as Michael is. And so a reminder for two things. Make sure that you're talking with your friends, connecting with people on the most intimate levels that you feel comfortable with, and get outside, everybody, and keep those pictures coming. Oh my goodness. I am by no means overwhelmed by the fact that now hundreds of you have sent me your vitamin N photos. Wherever you are, whenever you are, send me a photo. standupwithpete@gmail.com, or you can tweet them at me. People are doing both. And it's great. I love it. I'm now going to pick one every day and include it in my morning email that you get. If you're a subscriber to this show every day, you'll get that morning email and someone from somewhere's nature photos. I might have to include my own, though, for today's show, because the sunset here in the Northeast was all kinds of shades of pink and purple and reminded me so much of Charles Schulz's watercolor paintings from his Great Pumpkin and is it a Thanksgiving, Charlie Brown? Whatever. Those backgrounds that he would paint, that's what these skies, these December skies, are reminding me of. And by the way, my general rule for your nature photos, what I like, the criteria as far as I'm concerned, is that it has to be all nature, nothing man-made. You can include, I think, yourself in it or your kids, and certainly your animals in your nature pics. But generally, it's nothing man-made. No power lines, no cars, no houses. You try to limit it to just nature. So sunsets on the beach, maybe if there's a few people, but the less man-made and man or woman, the more nature, the better. Unless it's you or your family members. I always love to see pictures of you in nature. But that's the rules, the criteria for the vitamin N pictures. Send them my way. I love them. I'll include one in every single day's morning email. And if you're a subscriber, you'll see it. If not, you won't. But I'd still love to see your photos from anywhere in nature. So get your nature and share it. That is my main piece of advice to help maintain your mental health. Connect with people, get outside. Take pictures, send them to me. I'll share them with everybody. Everybody gets just a little bit more joy in a very dark time. And of course, the reason why it's a dark time is not only because it's winter here in America, but because the President of the United States and so many of his supporters, including in Congress, are denying the results of what was, by all accounts, a very secure American presidential election. And most importantly, we have now almost reached 300,000 dead Americans. And by most importantly, I mean most tragically, most important story, of course, is that the pandemic is raging, a surge upon a surge. Hospitals flooded. Another day of over 3,000 deaths due to COVID. But today, many are saying, was the beginning of the end because the vaccine is on the move. Some estimates are that 20 million Americans, the most vulnerable at nursing homes, could be vaccinated by the end of December. The first of nearly 3 million doses were sent across the country, which experts are calling the most ambitious vaccination campaign in the history of this nation. And now, of course, the real challenge is getting it in people's arms. In a nation where a frighteningly large percentage of our adults are completely taken by conspiracy and have a real frightening and dangerous lack of trust in expertise, institutions, and government. How do we convince them to get the vaccine? Here is the director of the NIH on Meet the Press. Francis Collins is his name. Here he is acknowledging that problem, begging people to get the vaccination.
And this is a source of great concern for all of us. And I would like to plead to people who are listening to this morning to really hit the reset button on whatever they think they knew about this vaccine that might cause them to be so skeptical. The data is out there now. It's been discussed in a public meeting, all the details of the safety and the efficacy for anybody who wants to look. This is a very powerful outcome of this incredibly intense year-long experience to develop this. And I think all reasonable people, if they had the chance to sort of put the noise aside and disregard all those terrible conspiracy theories, would look at this and say, I want this for my family. I want it for myself. People are dying right now. How could you possibly say, let's wait and see if that might mean some terrible tragedy is going to befall? And especially for healthcare providers, please, people, when you look back in a year and you say to yourself, did I do the right thing? I hope you'll be able to say yes, because I looked at the evidence.
Oh, I'm not so sure. I want to believe that once people start getting the shot and vaccinated and aren't dropping dead left and right, more and more people will jump on board. But I'm very, very concerned about whether or not people are actually going to follow through and get vaccinated. Now, I was watching the Jake Tapper on the State of the Union on the CNN, and he had Bill Gates on his show. And he asked Bill Gates, do you think we're going to have to go back to the early days of quarantining and shutting down during this surge?
Well, certainly mask wearing has essentially no downside. They're not expensive. Bars and restaurants in most of the country will be closed as we go into this wave. And I think, sadly, that's appropriate. Depending on how severe it is, the decision about schools is much more complicated because the benefits are pretty high. The amount of transmission is not the same as in restaurants and bars. So, trade-offs will have to be made. But the next 4 to 6 months really call on us to do our best, because we can see that this will end, and you don't want, somebody you love to be the last to die of coronavirus.
Jake Tapper also asked Bill Gates when he thought life would return to, quote, normal, like it was last January, say.
Certainly by the summer, we'll be way closer to normal than we are now. But even through early 2022, unless we help other countries get rid of this disease and we get high vaccination rates in our country, the risk of reintroduction will be there. And of course, the global economy will be slowed down, which hurts America economically in a pretty dramatic way. So we'll have, starting in the summer, about 9 months where a few things like big public gatherings will still be restricted. But, we can see now that somewhere between 12 to 18 months, and we have a chance, if we manage it well, to get back to normal.
We have a chance, if we manage it well, to get back to normal. Ooh, we've missed out on a lot of chances. We have not taken advantage of a lot of opportunities, and we just have not worked well enough together. And we've got to do better, right? Am I right? Am I wrong? Who am I talking to? Just standing here in a shed, hoping that you care. There was violence related to the election over the weekend. A man was attacked and beaten while holding a political sign at a Georgia rally. Police said a passerby attacked a man holding political signs who was standing on the side of the road. Police said a person stopped and confronted the man who was holding a John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock sign. These are the two guys running, obviously, for Senate in Georgia. Witnesses told Channel 2, WSB-TV in Atlanta, that the suspect punched the victim in the face, then tore up his campaign signs. The victim suffered wounds to his face and head. He was treated by paramedics at the scene and released. And where there's a lot of violence in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, 4 people were stabbed, 23 were arrested as Trump supporters and Counter-protesters clashed in downtown D.C. This was an event that was created, organized, motivated, and promoted by Trump supporters. And here is there's this weird video. I mean, there's a lot of crazy shit that happened over the weekend. Nothing too wild, but I mean, these are young Trump supporters, almost exclusively white and young, not wearing masks. And this is the chant that they had, which I'm with them on this. I'm absolutely with these young Trump supporters. And take a listen. Tell me where you're at.
The first million MAGA march, we promised that if the GOP would not do everything in their power to keep Trump in office, then we would destroy the GOP. Yeah!
Destroy the GOP.
And as we gather here in Washington, D.C. for a second million MAGA march, we're done making promises. It has to happen now. We are going to destroy the GOP.
Great. That's great news. How?
Let's go! Destroy the GOP!
They're chanting. Destroy the GOP. Trump supporters.
Destroy the GOP! Destroy the GOP!
This is what is happening.
Destroy the GOP! Destroy the GOP!
Okay.
The GOP wants us to hold the line and vote for rhinos like David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler in the Georgia.
They're booing the two Republican senators in Georgia. This is great news. That's remarkable and wild. But that's what you get when you have YouTube and radio and TV right-wing talk show hosts telling them that Republicans aren't doing enough. They aren't doing what they can. But listen, folks, they're doing everything they possibly can. Republicans in office are doing everything they can, but it will never be enough for people because they're being told by their favorite talk show host, because the talk show host has to create some kind of conflict, that the Republicans aren't doing everything they can. They are. There's nothing more that they can do. They've tried it all. They can't make up votes out of thin air, even though they're trying to. But I just thought that was a remarkable moment with these young Trump supporters chanting destroy the GOP and shitting on the two Republican senators in Georgia. Speaking of which, this is a really great ad. The animation is excellent, but this is an ad from the Midas Touch. It is an anti-Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, and this ad is inspired by How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Take a listen.
'Twas the night before Christmas, as Georgia turns blue. Most Georgians were suffering, apart from these two. That is, looting Loeffler and Chicken Perdue. Their stockings were stuffed from the stocks that they sold when they heard COVID was coming before we were told. They sold shares in casinos, airlines, TJ Maxx, and invested in drugs and in medical masks. They bought stocks that would rise, sold stocks that would fall. It could be their hearts were 2 sizes too small. They played down the virus, said we'd all be fine, while Loeffler bought a jet on the taxpayer's dime. And don't get me started on Chicken Perdue. How chicken is he? A debate he won't do. So come one, come all, let's vote by the 5th and make Warnock and Ossoff your 2 Senate picks. Midas Touch is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Oh, we need those Senate seats so badly for the future of the planet and, of course, the country. Anything that you can do to find a way to activate voters in Georgia, then do it. And if you have any ideas that I could boost or be involved with, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Not much time left to turn out the vote. I'll talk about it with Georgia State constitutional law professor Eric Segall, who is my guest today. And, of course, I've got to play for you what was probably the most widely talked about and viewed clip from the Sunday shows, according to me, and no metrics at all. But I saw it floating around a lot on social media. It was Congressman Steve Scalise, who was sitting down with Fox News Sunday's Chris Wallace. And I think it is pretty self-explanatory. Take a listen to this about 2 minutes of exchange.
the president-elect in those 4 states. Do you feel comfortable throwing out millions of votes of your fellow Americans?
Well, nobody wants any votes thrown out, Chris. And in fact, the 70-plus million votes that are also at stake for President Trump. Well, no, if you look at the Texas lawsuit, what it was saying is there are some states that didn't follow the laws that were on their books. The Constitution is very clear that it's state legislatures that set the process for having electors.
With all
some
due respect,
Secretary of State
Supreme Court
changed those rules.
The Supreme Court threw that out. They didn't even hear it.
The Supreme Court said they weren't going to take the case. They said Texas didn't have standing.
Yeah.
They said Texas didn't have standing.
Yeah.
They didn't say they were going to address the merits. Look, the Supreme Court, I think a lot of people know, didn't want to be anywhere near this court. They don't like getting in the middle of disputes between other branches of government. And that's just something they've done throughout history.
I don't know about that.
So bottom line, even though the electors on tomorrow are more than 270 of them are going to say that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States, you're not willing to recognize him as the president-elect, and you're not willing to stop contesting this election.
Well, hold on, Chris. First of all, Joe Biden has been going through a transition that even President Trump supported, while he's also following what the court allows. There are legal challenges allowed. Nobody said back during Bush v. Gore, prior to the Supreme Court finally resolving it, and ultimately there was electors met. There was a swearing in. Nobody disputed that, maybe some on the Democrat side, but you didn't see people asked prior to that to pass judgment before it was fully resolved. Let the legal process play out. But if you want to restore trust by millions of people who are still very frustrated and angry about what happened, that's why you've got to have this whole system play out. There will be a president sworn in on January 20th. But let's let this legal process play itself out.
All right, the reason why millions of people are frustrated and angry is because the president of the United States, with asshole shithead like you supporting him, is lying to people about what happened in the election. The people that he hired, all of them are saying it was the most secure election in American history. The president should be proud of that fact, but he can't be because he lost the most secure election in history. Steve Scalise. There's a lot of things I want to say about Steve Scalise, but I'm not going to say those things. But he stinks. And he and all of the other Republicans who signed on to this stupid lawsuit are cheaters. They're dishonest. They're anti-democratic. They don't respect the outcome of their own elections. They're sellouts. They're corrupt. They're bad. And they shouldn't be in Congress. Okay. That rant was brought to you by Everyman Jack deodorant, because that's what I wear. Everyman Jack cedarwood. If you want to smell like Pete Dominic, get Everyman Jack deodorant. They're not actually a sponsor, but I just looked around the shed to find a product that I actually use. All right, so the Electoral College, members of the Electoral College gather today in their respective states to cast their official ballots for president. And this process is usually a little more than a formal duty to rubber stamp the results of the November election, writes the New York Times, but not this year, of course. So will anything change with the president? Is he going to stop fighting and filing lawsuits and tweeting and being in denial? Of course, we know he's not going to, but Chris Walsh back on Fox News asked Karl Rove if he thought the president would give up now that the Electoral College is met, and whether or not his continuing to contest the election is good for him, bad for him, good for America, bad for America. Here is Bush's brain, one of the architects of the Iraq War in a way, and the evil genius that is Karl Rove.
Well, I believe that he will. I wouldn't be surprised to see tomorrow that there are maybe an attempt to disrupt some of the voting in the 6 contested states. I wouldn't be surprised to see expressions of public support for the president's position from Trump electors in states that he carried. I wouldn't be surprised on January 6th. I fully expect that one senator and one representative at minimum, that's what's required, can file a statement contesting the Electoral College results, but I don't see that it's going to be overturned tomorrow, and I don't see that it's going to be overturned on January 6th. As to your second question, it depends on, the answer to that depends upon what's his goal. If his goal is to lay the predicate to come back in 2024 and run again, he's helping himself at least gain the nomination explanation, but I think in the long run, he's not helping himself or the country. America likes comebacks, but they don't like sore losers, and he is on the edge of looking like a sore loser and probably will look like it after January 6th.
Ooh, that's gotta hurt when Karl Rove calls you a sore loser. And I'm sure it didn't make Trump feel any better when his old friend Chris Christie, who's been very supportive of Donald Trump, even though he hates Jared Kushner and Kushner hates him because Chris Christie put Jared Kushner's father Charles in jail. But anyway, it's totally normal and everything's fine. Here's Chris Christie on ABC.
Well, listen, the legal theory put forward by his legal team and by the president is an absurdity. And the reason why the Supreme Court didn't take it is because it's an absurd idea to think that any state or any number of states, no matter how good they are, can challenge another state's right to run the election as they see fit. And also, there's no evidence, as I've been saying since election night, show us the evidence. And what's gotten even worse, though, Martha, I think, is the attacks by the president on good, hardworking, decent Republican governors. And you've seen his attitude towards these folks change. And let's think about why. You know, back in September, he said about Doug Ducey, Doug is tough, Doug is strong, Doug is a good governor, the Arizona governor. He said about Brian Kemp back in the summer, that Brian is a capable man, he knows what he's doing, and he's done a very good job as governor. Now, after the election is over and he lost Arizona and Georgia, he says there are rhinos that are working harder against him. He's calling them corrupt. And also telling people things that aren't true.
So Chris, what happens
in Georgia,
to your
he's
party?
Talking about signature verification. Listen, Martha's going to people are going to have to stand up and start to say these things. I mean, the fact is in Georgia, and people should know this, that signature verification, which the president continues to tweet about, has been done twice in this election. It was done when the application for a mail-in ballot was sent in, and it was done when that mail-in ballot was ultimately sent in. And Governor Kemp has said this, the lieutenant governor has said it, the Secretary of State has said it. And so, the reason the Supreme Court is not taking this is not because of a lack of courage. It's for the same reason that every court has thrown this out. It's a lack of evidence and a lack of any type of legal theory that makes any sense. And the worst part, though, is attacking these guys like Brian Kemp, Doug Ducey, and others who are following the Constitution and executing the oath that they took.
Chris Christie choosing his Republican governor pals over his reality show President Pal. And that great clip from ABC News, you heard Martha Raddatz in there on This Week, whatever it is. It's a good show, I guess. Always interesting, has interesting panel. So anyway, Trump lost Karl Rove, and now he has lost his pal Chris Christie. But you know who he still has? He's got General Mike Flynn and the My Pillow asshole on Fox News yesterday.
I apologize to our viewers that are upset we were talking during the national anthem. This is live television indeed. Let me ask you, though, we believe the president may pass by, and obviously on the heels of the disappointing Supreme Court, just in 10 seconds, could you sum up where we go from here? What's the final message?
My final message is everybody keep the faith, because we're in the greatest revival in history, and this is an anomaly. And when we get through it, we're going to look back and say this all had to happen the way God's intended it to, and it'll all be okay. I just want everybody in the country to have faith that God's got his hand in all this, and it'll all be a blessing when it's all over. And there's our president.
And this, by the way, if you can look up here, Leland, the president flying by on Marine One at this very moment, and obviously
there's our president for 4 more years. There he is, right there. God bless America. We are one nation under God.
That guy is the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell. He's such a shithead, and he's one of those prosperity Christians. Is dumb pillow, is dumb, uncomfortable, awful product. I had one because I had to do live reads for that shithead when I was at Sirius XM, one of my many compromises when working in corporate media. So thank you for supporting me in independent media so that I don't have to do that. And by the way, sleeping on it feels like a pillowcase filled with those circus peanut candies. It's absolutely horrendous. I slept on it for an hour. I woke up. It felt like someone had punched my neck like a speed bag. All right, now the final audio clip is from a college football game on Saturday where Vanderbilt University kicker Sarah Fuller became the first woman to score in a Power 5 college football game. She made history yesterday, and here is the call from the SEC Sports Network. I thought this was really inspiring and a good final audio clip to end on.
And here comes Sarah Fuller onto the field. Now, last week, 2 weeks ago, rather, she made history as the first female to ever kick off at the Power 5 level. Now she can be the first to make an extra point at the Power 5 level, right through there.
I thought that was pretty cool. All right, coming up, my conversation with Professor Eric Segall from this past Sunday night. We talked about the lawsuit and aftermath, all the legal challenges to the election and what it meant and more. But first, it's time for everybody's favorite news segment. It's the news dump. This is where I talk about important undercovered headlines because everything going on with the pandemic, COVID-19, and of course, aftermath of the election and transition, a lot of important stories get covered up. That's why you never want to miss the news dump.
They call them dumps, big, massive dumps.
All right, this is a massive story, and in a normal news world or cycle, which doesn't seem to exist anymore, it would be all over the headlines. Russian hackers broke into federal agencies, U.S. officials suspect. The New York Times writes, in one of the most sophisticated and perhaps largest hacks in more than 5 years, email systems were breached at the Treasury and Commerce Departments. Other breaches are under investigation. The Trump administration acknowledged on Sunday the hackers acting on behalf of a foreign government, almost certainly a Russian intelligence agency, according to federal and private experts, broke into a range of key government networks, including Treasury and Commerce Departments, and had free access to their email systems. Good God, what does that mean? Terrible news there. Passengers aboard a flight out of the Las Vegas airport, McCarran International, got to see a guy climb onto the wing of the plane just as it was about to take off. Alaska Airlines Flight 1367 was preparing to depart from Vegas to Portland when pilots saw a dude on the tarmac. Then passengers saw him get up on the wing of the Boeing 737. I watched the videos. Have you seen the videos? This guy's just crawling around, looks clearly mentally ill, then falls off the plane and police gather him on the ground. That's a weird and terrible but entertaining story. ABC News and everybody else reporting, the Associated Press. Chinese capsule with moon rocks begins return to Earth. I feel like every week during the news dump I have a Chinese space story. Chinese space capsule bringing back the first moon rocks in more than 4 decades started its 3-day return to Earth on Sunday. It's cool. I'm sure that's all they were doing on the moon is just getting some rocks. I'm sure they didn't build like a massive gun or base or anything else. Chinese moon rocks. I'm sure that's all it is. Nothing to worry about there. An op-ed about Dr. Jill Biden has raised a real controversy. Wall Street Journal published an op-ed about her on Saturday. And the piece by an 83-year-old writer named Joseph Epstein is imploring Jill Biden to lose the DR in front of her name. And it was terrible and stupid, and everybody's really upset, and rightfully so. Speaking of people being upset, people have been upset for generations that the Cleveland baseball team, Major League Baseball team, because they should drop Indians and the offensive Chief Wahoo logo from their name. And guess what? The Cleveland baseball team will drop Indians from the name, according to a report from the New York Times and confirmed by other news outlets. The decision to change the team name could be announced as soon as this week. How do you feel about that, Scott, Ohio? Cleveland fans. A man was shot in New York City by police after a Christmas choral concert on the steps of Cathedral Church St. John the Divine in Manhattan. Apparently the guy wanted to commit suicide by a cop because he was screaming, "Kill me." No other injuries, I think, reported in that sad story. Good news in my house, we are COVID-free. That's always a good day when you're COVID-free. And that is the news dump. I hope that is also the case, by the way, in your house, that nobody has COVID, that everybody is healthy. Thank you very much for listening to the news. That was a long one. Whew. And I'm excited, though, to get to my first and only guest. I guess that's why I made it a little bit longer. Do you like two guests? You like one guest? I like to give you as many options as possible. And a lot of people are telling me, hey, I listen to the show from start to finish every morning, no matter how long it is, which I think is just so awesome. So thank you. But always interested in getting your feedback. One of your favorite guests, of course, is constitutional law professor from Georgia State University, author of Originalism as Faith and Supreme Myths, and contributor to Dorf on Law. He's been published in the New York Times, and the LA Times, and every major legal journal. And he has his own podcast now. Look for Eric Segall wherever you get your podcast. He's on Twitter at eSpinSegall. Lots to catch up and always interesting interpretations with my friend, Professor Eric Segall, right now. All right, it is Sunday evening, and I have him now. Everybody knows him and loves him. I've just given you, of course, a great introduction. It's the Legal Eagle, Eric Segall, or as I've been referring to you lately on social media and here on the podcast, Dr. Gloomsberg, Dr. Doomsbury.
And I reject the label.
Well, you can reject it all you want, but as I was preparing to interview you this evening, I went through your Twitter timeline, and you did sound open to, and I quote, end times, sir. That sounds pretty doomsy and bloomsy.
That's out of context, my friend.
It is. There's no doubt.
Yes. It's interesting. I was reflecting on life. That's what I do. The Legal Eagle, which is the name you gave me, I never asked for. But it does, life kind of goes full circle because in, I want to say, second, third, and fourth grades, I was teased by my friends and called bird brain. Kind of a theme. And then Jonathan Livingston Seagull came out, whatever that book is. And so I was called Jonathan Livingston, which was a bird reference for a very long time. And now at the end of my days, not my end of my days, but the end of my days, you're calling me the Legal Eagle, and life just works that way sometimes.
You've always been a bird.
I'm really rambling incoherently, aren't I?
You've always been a bird. You've always soared into the sky.
Thank you, my friend.
I mean, I'm trying to make it sound like a positive.
Well, okay. For the record, before I met you, I was a devoted and dedicated teacher who wanted to improve as my 2 decades of teaching went on, as I met you. I was a decent legal scholar, and I published a lot. But to the extent my career has soared, that is in substantial part because of the ways you have groomed me for this kind of life, which I never thought I'd ever have, which is radio, television, blogging, podcasts, all that stuff. That never happens without you.
Well, that's very kind of you. You know, I am a birder. I am
it is the truth.
A groomer of birds. Well, we all love you for it, and it's been exciting to see you get, a lot of attention and respect based on your radical theories regarding the Supreme Court. And
once radical, now well accepted.
Yeah, that's interesting. Over that time, how where the kind of the window has moved closer to what you believe. I just hearing a very serious conversation. Where was I listening? I forget, somewhere yesterday about term limits on the court, and I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, where did I hear that first? Over and over and over. But there's a
and Pete, sorry to interrupt, but when we first started talking about that was after Citizens United came out. And that was like the first big case you and I discussed. And it was shortly after that I started talking about term limits. And for the first, that's 2010, like 7 years of that, it was just like, me and you talking. There were very few people talking about term limits. And it's amazing that how far the world has come on that issue. I think most people now think, of course, that's a good idea. Yeah. Is there a way to get it done?
Yeah, it's, we will see. Let me ask you, let's go back a little bit and just talk about history just a little bit in terms of elections. A lot of people, including Republicans, many of which were on board this batshit crazy lawsuit, but others as well, have cited Bush v. Gore in 2000 and how that wasn't decided for a month until after the election. What's the difference between that case and the election of 2020?
Just about everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So the election for those people who weren't born yet or are too young or don't remember, the election of 2000 was done except for disputed ballots in one state. And actually, Pete, I think one part of one state, if my memory serves. So it was a very focused and when everything was said and done, by the way, when it was all over, I believe Bush had like 550 more votes, maybe 600.
Yeah, it was under 600. Yep.
It was razor thin, right? So we can debate, and I'm happy to do it, the merits of Bush versus Gore, and I can play both sides, by the way, on that. My friend, I'm going to mention him, Judge Posner, wrote a book about how Bush versus Gore was correctly decided. I don't agree with him about that. And he had a lot of non-legal reasons for that, but not because he knows the law didn't matter. But the biggest difference is, there are so many differences. So one is, that, again, a very focused dispute on one part of one state. So that is something courts do. Courts have been in the business for a long time of ruling on challenges to elections like that, where someone says, because of the way that ballot was constructed in that part of the state, these people were either disenfranchised or whatever, there was fraud, whatever it is. That nothing like that is like this election, where that lawsuit that the Supreme Court dismissed on Friday, which was the culmination of Trump's legal strategy, which, by the way, I'm going to pat myself on the back, I predicted a month ago.
Did you really?
I said to you on your show, you can roll the tape. What I said was, where this is heading is, by the end of whenever, the Trump position is going to be that because of COVID, there were far too many mail-in ballots.
That's right. That's right. You did say that. Yep.
I did say that. And they were going to try to throw the whole thing out because of that. And that's a claim that requires evidence. Obviously, Trump doesn't have that evidence. He hasn't had it any place. He's lost all the lawsuits. That's so different than Bush versus Gore, where we knew there were legitimate issues with what was going on. And now, don't get me wrong. The Supreme Court should absolutely have stayed out of that dispute and let Florida resolve it. But it wasn't a challenge to the integrity of democracy. This is a challenge to the integrity of democracy. And of course, the other big difference is we all knew, even at the time, I know you were too young at the time, but we adults at the time knew that whether Bush won or Gore won, they were going to accept it, concede it, and move on. And it was going to take some time, obviously, but neither one was going to put the country at risk. We knew that. That's obviously not true here. So
right.
That's a big.
I was like 20. That's the year I met Bell.
You were a kid. You were basically.
I wasn't paying that much attention to the Supreme Court. No, you brainwashed me into all this. I'm really not. No one knows me. I mean, people know me, understand this. I am not in any way a mere. I'm not suggesting that Bush versus Gore wasn't obscenely, incredibly important and wrong and terrible and did this country lasting damage. Right.
It really did. We don't have the Iraq War without Bush versus Gore. I don't think. But
might not even had 9/11. Who knows? Impossible to prove such things. But yeah.
But the legal context is completely different. There's just no.
So let's take a look just at the legal context. And I just want to explain one thing that I think is kind of funny and important, I think, for people to understand, all of the arguments, to be able to, if possible, if you can get into a conversation with your friend, neighbor, relative about it, be like, well, this is what happened here. And I think it's one of the most interesting and really dumbest things that you're hearing the president and others say is, all of a sudden, there was a whole bunch of dumps that came in overnight. And it's like, well, no, I mean, this is just how it works in Michigan. Detroit came in at like 3 a.m. There's a lot of people live in Detroit. They don't like Trump. Same thing in Wisconsin with Milwaukee.
You know what's amazing
There's
about
nothing
that?
weird about that. The problem is that Republicans made laws in states, I think at least like Pennsylvania, that said you couldn't count the votes until they came in. Florida was able to count the votes ahead of time. And so Florida was able to announce on election night who had won. That should be the way that I think you probably agree every state's system worked. But Republicans wanted there to be some question and wanted to kind of set up this weeks-long process of counting votes. That's why they did what they did, the Republican legislatures in certain states like Pennsylvania.
I can't say it any better than you just did, my friend. I will add this to what you said, because what you said is perfect. I agree 100%.
But just in terms of, is there any reason not to do what Florida and other states do, which is counting the votes early, especially when you have all these mail-in votes coming in?
So, Pete, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that stuff, and I really don't know what the arguments are pro and con for doing it that way. I really don't know.
Well, if you have a lot of mail-in ballots because there's a viral pandemic,
right.
and you want to have as little confusion as possible, I don't know what the objection would be to count votes as they come in so that you can determine the winner of the election on the night.
That would be my lay opinion as a citizen. I've not studied it. I do want to say, though, that what you're saying about what they're saying, which is that, Trump had that stupid tweet about how the odds are 1 in quadrillion or something that it can turn around. The other difference between America's electoral atmosphere in 2020 and 2000 is, Republicans distrusted Gore, if they were honest, because of his connection to Clinton. I mean, Al Gore, I think if you put Republicans under oath, that they would say he's probably a pretty decent fellow. I mean, I don't think they think all politicians lie. I think Gore is considered a fairly honest politician. And George Bush at the time, spoiled son and all that stuff. But on the one hand, or keeping one thought in our head, all politicians lie. It comes with the job. And by the way, that includes Supreme Court justices. But all politicians lie. And then there's Trump, right? Or Huey Long, or other people, or people like that, who lying isn't the right description for it. Trump, Huey Long, demagogues like that, there is no truth lying thought in their head. They just say what is good for them, and it doesn't matter what so Trump is so the famous example I used to give you all the time is Trump is doing a rally and CNN is there and CNN is covering it.
Yeah.
And Trump would say, look, CNN is turning off the red light on their cameras. And the red light wouldn't be turned off. And Anderson Cooper would be like, he's saying we're turning our cameras off, but I'm here to tell you we're not turning our cameras off. It doesn't matter.
Right.
So my point in all that is the degree to which a lack of reality characterizes Donald Trump. That wasn't true about Bush or Gore. And it's a big difference. It really is. I mean, it's a big difference.
But now it's infected the entire party. Yes. And I want to talk about Georgia because you are a professor there at Georgia State in the upcoming runoff election. But before we do, let's just talk about what happened on Friday and this lawsuit that the Supreme Court decided not to take. And you can look at it 9-0 or 7-2, depending on how people want to interpret it. But basically, my understanding is Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito said, we should take it because we should always take these types of cases that a state brings, but there's no merits to it.
Well, what they said is we wouldn't give any relief requested, and we would not give. We agree that the plaintiff's complaint for relief. I forget the exact wording, but they did say the plaintiff shouldn't get relief, so that means the plaintiffs lose. Period. Whatever. I mean, Trump's spin on this is just completely wrong. Now, by the way, Trump being interviewed today, I think it was today, about standing is one of the funniest things. I mean, we have to pause for a moment because you and I.
Was that when he was talking to Brian Kilmeade, or?
I think so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
He's also tweeting about standing.
Yeah. Explain what he's saying, what he's getting wrong. I don't have the audio.
No, it's not that. Well, first of all, let's just pause at the idea that Donald Trump could even talk about standing as if he knew anything about this legal doctrine that you and I have tried to talk about where relevant over the years, and it's hard for me to explain to lay people, much as Donald Trump. But Trump was saying, well, it was incoherent what he was saying. I tweeted about it just an hour ago. He was saying the court got standing wrong. I'm the president. It says so in the Constitution. And I tweeted out, what does the word "it" mean in that sentence? Because no one knows. I don't know what he's referring to. Here's the bottom line. And let me do it by way of contrast.
Okay.
So Georgia, Florida, and Alabama have been fighting, I think, most of my adult life about water. There's disputed water boundaries, and water can be very scarce in some places. And anyway, so they've been suing each other forever. Georgia is allowed to sue Florida, or Florida is allowed to sue Georgia or Alabama, whatever, when Georgia is injured in some way by what Florida is doing directly. So when Georgia says this river or lake, or it's on the boundary of Georgia and Alabama, we think it's ours, We want it to be our lake for our use. And Alabama says, no, we want ours. Everybody understands that's like a normal lawsuit, right? It's just two states. Okay. Here's what Georgia's not allowed to do. And no one ever thought they could. Georgia can't say, you know what? We think bad things are happening in Arkansas, so we're going to sue Arkansas to stop it. Like that doesn't, that.
If one state has capital punishment, the other state does not, or any other law, they can't be like, oh, we don't like your law. We got to get rid of it.
That was a very, very good hypothetical.
Well, it's unfortunately very relevant.
Professor Dominic. So I know, sadly. So Texas was saying that somehow election procedures in other states impaired their ability to elect the president of their choice or something like that. The complaint was actually extremely hard to decipher. And there are about 15 different reasons the court could have said, no, you lose. But the reason the court gave was simply that Texas one state doesn't have standing to complain about the election procedures in other states. So when Trump says they didn't even look at the evidence, that's true, but that's true for every standing case when the court dismisses it. Standing is always or almost always before you get into the merits of a case. What standing basically means is, do you have the right to argue before the court? Think about it metaphorically.
Yep.
You're standing before the court. Do you have a right to stand there? Now, the court standing doctrines, Pete, are as tortured as any in the law of the Constitution. I put on Twitter today, and I haven't gotten a response. I don't know any federal courts. So there's a course in law school called Federal Courts where you teach procedure, and standing is part of that. I don't know any federal courts professor, liberal, conservative, very liberal, moderate, extreme, not extreme, who doesn't think the court standing doctrine isn't just all made up goulash. Now, we would have different methods of changing it, liberals, conservatives, but we all agree. Like, we don't all agree abortion is screwed up. We don't all agree affirmative action is screwed up. We all agree the law of standing is screwed up, and that's for a different topic. But in this case, I think the court pretty much got it right. Texas doesn't have a right to complain about Georgia's voting procedures. Next, move on.
So the case that they're, though, trying to make, I mean, what we're hearing from a lot of conservative constitutional lawyers is how offended they are, because this goes more against kind of a conservative principles than it does liberal principles. If you're talking about federalism and states' rights, that's why it seems even more, I think, hypocritical, dishonest, and fascinating, of course, that the case is being brought by 17 conservative attorneys general led by Texas. People say it's because that guy, Ken Paxton, the attorney general of Texas, is in trouble and wants to get a pardon. Doesn't matter really why. What I'm interested in is how hypocritical it is for conservative attorneys general to try to overthrow the elections in other states. One can only imagine if New York or California or Massachusetts sued to overthrow the election in Texas.
Right. Or imagine if California sued to change Nevada's COVID procedures.
Sure. Good one. Yeah, that would be outrageous. People would be outraged, and rightfully so.
But Pete, let me just, so what you said is completely fair. Unless one is well versed in the constitutional law of federalism, which no people aren't. I'm here to tell you, and I know I told you this before on both your radio show and your podcast many times, but I cannot impress upon it enough. There is really no such thing as federalism, in the sense that people only care about states' rights when the state is doing something they want. And if the state is, and this is on both sides, liberals, it all depends on the issue, not whether it's a state or federal government. So
it's situational.
Yeah. So for example, you and I had, so many discussions because the case is so, and I know it's not a sexy case, but it was a really important one when the court reversed itself, reversed the 1977 decision and said states are not allowed to require their own workers to pay union dues.
Right.
Because even if they're not part of the union, because the state's rationale for that was the union gets better wages and overtime rules and safety conditions for all the workers. And whether you benefit from it or not, you should contribute to that. Doesn't mean you contribute to the political arm of those unions, But to the extent they're doing collective bargaining, you have to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And we can and 23 states did it, 23. And we can debate I'm not a labor lawyer, so I can't, but smart people can debate the pro-union, anti-union, pro-society, that's not the point. When the court overturned the decisions of 23 states to do it, think about how anti-federalism that is, right? I mean, it is so debatable whether paying union dues is speech to begin with, leaving aside all the other legal issues. So you would think conservatives, well, states' rights, but it was the conservative justices and conservative lawyers, law professors, and politicians who applauded that decision because they don't like unions. So it wasn't about federalism; it was about unions.
Right.
And there were 50 examples like that.
Well,
so,
let me ask you though about another issue that I really want to. I think it's kind of really frustrating and upsetting. I really know nothing about is the idea that fraudulent lawsuits, that the Trump campaign led by a real carnival of cartoon villain like lawyers.
Don't impugn carnivals. I like carnivals.
Fair enough. Rudy Giuliani and others has lost, I think, like 50 lawsuits. At what point is the court?
58 or 9. I think.
Does the court say, okay, you have brought similar suits in courts all around the country? You have to stop. You're wasting everybody's time, and it's I thought there was some kind of regulation of that, some kind of law against fraudulent.
There's something,
and you could get disbarred if you kept doing that because it's a real, there's resources are limited, courts are limited. Resources.
Back up. That's not all. There's something. I'm only talking federal courts, so I don't know anything about state courts. I'm not talking about state courts, but in the federal courts, where most of these lawsuits, not all. I mean, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Wisconsin Supreme Court, but in the federal lawsuits, there is something called Rule 11. That's the shorthand for Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 11. And what it says is lawyers and clients have to have a good faith belief in the facts and law in their legal proceedings. Just a good faith. And that's fair, right? If you have a good faith belief, you shouldn't be punished, even if you're wrong. But you have to have a good faith belief. And unfortunately for our entire civilization, it's used very infrequently. So we have this idea in our society. Boy, Pete, it goes back to de Tocqueville in the 55 or something, saying, in America, every political issue ends up in court. Or we can talk about Perry Mason, a show in the 50s, black and white, but that was so popular where lawyers are fighting and the truth comes out and whatever. We have this adversarial system where the idea is two people argue opposing sides, the truth comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, there's so much wrong with that. The first of which is, of course, imbalance of money on both sides of most lawsuits. But leaving that aside, judges don't like to sanction their lawyers. And that's because judges were lawyers, and it's really hard to get Rule 11 sanctions against you. It can happen.
I was wondering about that, and I was unfamiliar with it. All right.
So let me give you, hold on.
Yep.
Here's the epitome of it. On Friday, some lawyer somewhere filed an amicus brief, a motion for leave to file an amicus brief in the Supreme Court in the Texas lawsuit on behalf of New California and New Nevada.
Right. What was that all about?
I don't know, but it should be sanctioned, and he wasn't. Because there is no New California.
Right.
There is no New Nevada. There's no good faith belief such things exist. Yet this lawyer said he was his client. They were his clients. That should be sanctioned. Like that should be punished.
You wrote a very funny piece about that at Dorf on Law.
I tried. I don't know if it was funny, but it was satire at least.
The new state of Dorf on Law versus Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, actually, the summary of allegations in my fake complaint are all true. In other words, what I accuse Trump of doing, they're all true things, and they're all awful. So if you want a catalog of some of the terrible things he's done, you can find it there. Anyway, let me just one last thing about this. You're right. Your instinct is really right about this. All these lawsuits are being filed without really any evidence, yet but Pete, the lawyers have been very careful about not claiming fraud on behalf of election officials. They have in the media, but in the lawsuits, because they know they'll get sanctioned if they do. So that's, what's going on.
What do you make of I mean, everybody has an opinion on this one today, but just the idea that this lawsuit was ever a thing, the 17 attorneys general and the precedent that they set, this being part of their record, the rest of their careers, those AGs across the country. Then you've got, 120 Republicans in the House now as well, signing on to that lawsuit. Like, what does that, everybody has a take, Eric, on what that means about, I guess the easiest way to say is there's the belief in democracy. I mean, so many smart people I'm reading and follow and trust are basically saying the Republican Party is no longer a viable political party for in the United States of America for the simple fact that they don't believe in democracy. They are an autocratic, authoritarian party that tried to overturn a democratic election. I mean,
so I will have a different take than most of those people, which is not unusual for me. You can decide what you think about it. On the one hand, those 126 or however many there were Republicans in the House should be embarrassed and hopefully politically punished. The 17 attorney generals, 18 if you count Texas, I hope that Democrats use this against them. It was a terrible thing to do. It was a sham of a lawsuit, and all of them should suffer damage to their careers because of this. And they're not trying to bring democracy down until they actually do something. You're allowed to file lawsuits. They're using democratic processes. In other words, I've been, as you know, I have been more afraid than most people that Trump may not leave the White House in the sense of a coup, like the military behind him, whatever. That's killing democracy. Filing lawsuits saying there was fraud in an election and the Supreme Court should step in and do something about it. And here's the key, living by the results of those lawsuits, which I assume the 120 members of Congress and the AGs, they're not. Now, to the extent these people are enabling these white racist, whatever they're called, the boys, whatever they're called, to the extent that they are igniting revolution or civil war or violence.
Well, they're destroying faith in America's election system.
Well, yes. But that's terrible. And they should be called out for it. But the way you described it in your question to me, so far, no one has done anything that's killing democracy in the sense
of... If the Supreme Court had taken it and agreed with them, it would have been. Yeah.
We would have been civil war, yeah. No, I
yeah, but so it sounds like you're saying they're allowed to file any suit. They're allowed to pursue a case.
Yeah.
But with the case that they're pursuing, Eric, the reason I think the way it's fair to frame it the way I did and so many others have is because the case that they're pursuing is bullshit. They know that there is no evidence of fraud, and Republican secretaries of state and Republican governors have also said that they don't think that there is any evidence. There is not evidence, and they're still following suit to overthrow an election with zero evidence of fraud.
And I hope no one is misinterpreting this misinterpreting me, excuse me. I'm not defending it. I think it was heinous. I think they should be politically punished for it. And we live in a world, and we don't have to go over this again, but I can, off the top of my head, well, let's just name them. Heller, the gun case, Citizens United, the actual, not the holding, but the rationale, which was the important part, and Shelby County versus Holder, the case that overturned the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. What the Supreme Court did in all three of those cases, Pete, is so anti-democratic, so heinous, such bad faith. Justice Roberts deliberately misquoted a case to get to where he had to go in Shelby County versus Holder. We know that because there are ellipses where there should be text. And he cited an old case, put ellipses in the sentence, and that distorted the entire meaning of the sentence. So I'm just saying we live in a legal system. And this is what I was trying to tell you earlier, or suggest earlier, excuse me. Unfortunately, in our country, you can file lawsuits that have very little basis, And there's a long tradition for that. And even worse than that, I did a book review over the last week about a book about Scalia. That this book is one of the best books I've ever read in the law.
Oh, wow.
It's a great book about, I mean, of course I agree with it. That's my bias, but it calls Scalia, like I've been saying with you for 10 years about Scalia's inconsistencies, his hypocrisies, all that stuff. This book, just details it with precision and all that stuff. And one of the things it talks about is how, Shelby County, the voting rights disaster case, came out the day after the court struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA. And Scalia, in one case, Scalia is talking about how inappropriate it is for the Supreme Court to second guess a decision of Congress. That's the same-sex marriage case, obviously, and how the court is a committee of 9 lawyers telling the world what to do, and how it's not our job, and we should be, judicial restraint, and all this stuff. And then the very next day, he votes to overturn a law that a unanimous Senate passed. Right. That a Republican, so when we live in that, when we live in that world of hypocrisy by Supreme Court justices,
I understand what your larger.
It's hard for me to get that mad at people as long as they're willing to live with the democratic decision that is given to them. I
understand that, but all of those seem to really pale in comparison to trying to overthrow an election.
Well, they're asking the court to overthrow the election, and the court said no. Courts said no. I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to be in this position. These people are heinous. I can't stand them, and they should all be politically punished. It's not overthrowing democracy until it gets either illegal or violent. I guess that's my point. Now, to the extent it's inspiring people to do illegal and violent things, that's a different conversation.
Well, that is a different conversation. And
by the way, I wasn't as outraged as you are.
No, it's all right.
You get desensitized to this kind of stuff when you follow the Supreme Court for a living.
By the way, the violence that has been predicted, I think there would have obviously been far more, and I would have joined people if the elections were overturned. But what we're seeing right now is just very expected over the weekend. The Proud Boys, these are just guys, by the way, Eric, that want to go fight. They're like guys that go out on a Friday night or any other night and be like, let's go look for a fight. They're just assholes on kind of both sides. I mean, anybody that goes out looking for a fight and gets in a fight, you'll find one. And so that's the extent of the violence right now, is a handful of people at a couple rallies, a couple protests. And, I'm not too worried about that. I'm just not going to those types of protests where there's violent people that are there looking for violence. I didn't go to those bars either, by the way.
Right. And don't get me wrong. I said, so here's a little story for you. I've mentioned to you before, I have this incredibly nerdy constitutional law list that I'm on that you've made fun of in the past. But it has thousands of law professors and others. And there's actually a federal judge on this list. And I can't tell you his name, but I shouldn't, but he's very well respected. He's very old, but he's very well respected. And he's Republican. And we were having a discussion the other day about this before the Supreme Court decided the case on Friday. And I said, I said, I'm not advocating this, but were the Supreme Court to rule, that Georgia, if they were to change the result of the election or even change the result in Georgia, the cities would burn. Like Atlanta would burn to the ground.
I'd be there burning them. What else is there to fight for if not that?
But this is what really got to me, Pete. I'm getting serious for a minute. Sure. This really surprised me. So I said that, and I was clear. I wasn't advocating that. I was just saying what was going to happen. So this judge he first wrote a thing to the whole list saying, so it's interesting to me that he called me a well-respected law professor, would say this kind of extreme rhetoric. He wasn't, and he asked me, and then he asked a question I didn't understand about it. I couldn't figure out what he was saying. And I wasn't even sure he was referring to me because a really, really, I'm not being modest here, an authentically famous law professor was also in the conversation. And I thought maybe he was talking to him. So I wrote him privately and I said, I'm sorry, Your Honor, if you're asking me that question, I don't understand it. And he wrote.
What was the question? You didn't say what he.
I couldn't even repeat it to you because I don't understand it. It was a question about something about violence in the elections, and could cities really burn because of a court decision? Was kind of what it was saying. And so then he kind of repeated the question in a way that I understood it. Like, why would you say that cities would burn because of a court decision? And I wrote him back and I said, it's not because of a court decision. It's because of overturning an election. That's why cities would burn. And then in his response, I could tell, like, Pete, we are so siloed. Like, when he thought about it, I think he got it. But he didn't really understand the idea that people in Georgia would be so mad if a court decision reversed. And I even said to him, there are still people here who think that Stacey Abrams, who ran for governor against the current governor, Brian Kemp, that he cheated to win. I said, I'm not taking a position on that. But there are people here who think that, and they're still bitter about that.
Yeah.
If the Supreme Court were to come in and tell Georgia it's really red when it wants to be blue, no, Atlanta would burn.
I think there's also something to the simple fact that black people have had to fight to get the right to vote, to keep the right to vote, to remove obstacles from voting. And so it's like, it's that much more. I think that a lot of us, I was saying this, I got in trouble on Twitter, I don't know, a few weeks ago for saying, everybody calm down, they're not going to overturn Michigan. And people are like, don't tell us to calm down. And I was like, fair enough. You know what? You're right. I understand why you are so upset. You fight so hard to get the right to vote. Easy for me to say, I've never not had the right to vote, or people that, are like me. So I just think that there's so much more passion and history to overturning black people's votes in Detroit, in Michigan, in Georgia, specifically, and Wisconsin and Milwaukee, where that's what they were trying to do. And I've had some really interesting conversations with people over the past week about how, I'd love to hear what you think about them, but, talking to black folks, specifically Pam Keith, who was running for Congress in Florida, about, there's just a certain segment of Americans, white supremacists, that do not think that black folks or even Democrats really should have the right to vote, that they don't count as citizens, that they are not valid and they should not be counted, and they resent them for being counted. And I've heard so many people now say that you just don't want us to be here, to have the right to vote and to vote. You don't want our votes to be counted, which is why you have made it so hard for us to vote to begin with. And therein lies a legitimate conflict for which they will continue to lose at this point, I think.
I think there's a lot to what you're saying. You and I, a couple of years ago, were in my home state doing a show about my home state. And I mentioned on the air, and then there was a whole, thing about it, that there are still far too many people south of the Mason-Dixon line, but also in rural Ohio and upstate New York and other places.
No doubt.
But just talking about south of the Mason-Dixon line, who really, they still call it the War of Northern Aggression. I'm not saying they want slavery, but there's a big part of that constituency that resents African Americans, period, full stop, and doesn't think they should be full equal members of our country.
Well,
You remember that?
Yeah, I do. I remember where I was.
And a bunch of people called and said, Segal's right.
Yeah, they did. And I was surprised and I was sad, but also enlightened at the same time. It was a really interesting thing to learn while I was actually in Georgia talking to you, and have so many people call up and back you up. Let me ask you about, how are you familiar? I sent this New York Times article to you. A lot of people are writing about it. This idea about January 6th and how House members.
I can tell you all about that. I researched it just for you.
Oh, you did?
No, I'm kidding.
Under rules laid out in the Constitution in the Electoral Count Act of 1887, something like that. I don't know.
1876, I believe. Not sure.
What is this? What do we? There's nothing to be concerned with here. I don't think.
No, there is not. But no, there's nothing to be concerned this year. This will show you, though, how this is one of the thin reeds our constitutional system lays on that could someday be bad. So basically, tomorrow, right, the votes get sent to Congress, all that stuff. And then on January 6th, they get counted by the president of the Senate, who happens to be Mike Pence. And in the normal course of business, Biden would be named the president. There is a statutory way, and this is all done. Congress passed this law, and what it amounts to, Pete, is if one senator and one member of the House, you need one from each body, objects to the counting of the ballots, or claims the election was rigged or fraudulent or whatever. Well, there's two words for it. Basically, if they say the election was rigged, then the meeting is adjourned, and the Senate goes to the Senate, and the House. They're all together for this, but then they separate, and the House goes to the House, and they vote on the objection. Now, there are members of the House. So there were Democrats in the House who did this in January of 2017, but no one in the Senate agreed, so it didn't go anywhere. But Democrats shouldn't get too high and mighty about this because they did it in 2017. What's going to happen this year, if it happens at all, and by the way, Pete, I want it to happen, and I'll explain that in a minute. Yeah, I do. If we have a minute, I'll tell you. But so let's assume some crazy senator and some crazy member of the House object. They retire to their respective places. And
I know why you want them to do it.
And they vote. It takes both houses to overturn the election. Obviously, the House of Representatives is not going to vote to overturn the election. I don't think the Senate is either, but certainly the House is not, because Democrats control the House. And if they disagree, then the certified votes are the ones that count, and that means Biden becomes president.
Right.
Now, here's why I want it to happen.
Because Pence has to read it.
To have a roll call in both houses.
Yeah.
Making Republicans pick would be great. So I kind of hope that happens.
Making Republicans pick?
In other words, let's say you are a Republican in a fairly conservative district, but not an insane district. And you're conservative, but you're not insane. If you vote against this because your heart and soul tell you to, it's wrong. If that's what you do, you will be primaried from your right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
If you vote for it, you will be effectively hurt, hopefully, on your left. So it puts them in a. So that's why I don't think they're going to find a senator.
Either way, Mike Pence has to read the results of each state's election.
Yes,
and
well, you think that's hard here? That's what Al Gore did in 2000. Think about that.
But he did it. But he did it.
Yeah.
To be clear. All right, last question for you, which is about Georgia. What's it like being in Georgia right now with this runoff election? I'm told, I don't know if you watch TV shows in real time, but you're inundated by commercials.
Yes.
And what is your thoughts on this runoff election? Kelly Loeffler today, by the way, is seen
posing with a white supremacist.
Yeah, which is, by the way, I wouldn't impugn anybody, for any politician or any celebrity, for taking a picture with a horrible person. They don't know every person's background.
No, she knew this person.
Well, even so, the point here, I think, that somebody made is this guy who took a picture with her supports her. If white supremacists support you, you've got a problem. It's not that she took a picture with him. It's that he supports her.
Right. All right. So a few things. I have. I was with a very distinguished and senior. By senior, I mean 78-year-old lawyer the other day, whose wife used to be a member of the Georgia House, and both this family is unbelievably clued into Georgia politics. With on the liberal side, although she was a Republican for a long time, she was a liberal Republican for a long time in Georgia. But anyway. They're pretty pessimistic. They think, the chances of both of them winning, both Democrats winning, very small. The chances of Loeffler, whatever her name is, losing to the Reverend, I think, is pretty good. I think, and we don't think Purdue's going to lose this. The incumbent's going to lose to John Ossoff. But in a year where none of us thought Georgia would vote for Biden, who knows? That's one thing.
Right.
But let me tell you, Pete, I'm glad we got here. I love full circle. Like when I write blog posts or even law review articles or even books, I try to.
Yeah, you've always told me that, which is why I conduct this interview this way. I'm very talented.
Yes. So circling back to Dr. What did you call me?
It was a number of different names I've been playing with. Gloomsburg, Doomsbury, Dr. Gloom and Doom.
That may be the opposite of that.
Oh, Dr. Sunshine.
I see sunshine.
Please don't.
on a happy day. Sorry.
You doubled
so
down.
Something's been happening around Atlanta. I can't speak for Georgia, but around Atlanta, all over Atlanta. I mean, all over. I don't know who did it, and I don't know if it was Abrams people or not. I just don't know. I don't think so, actually. All these signs are going up, Pete, all everywhere. Vote, vote, go vote. Like these big, huge signs, you can't miss them on the side of the road. And it's really inspiring. I mean, it's really, I'm telling you, and you see African American kids putting up these signs, like you drive, and it's very, very inspiring. And I'm trying to find some way to be optimistic and inspiring and inspired by 2021 and what's coming. And I do think that when Georgia, freaking Georgia, turns blue in a presidential election in our climate.
Yeah.
And when that was done with the assistance of, or maybe even the primary assistance of an African-American woman who I think is going to be the next governor of our state, or even the idea that she came so close last time to being the governor of our state.
Stacey Abrams.
Yeah. A black woman. Because there's never been a black female governor in the United States. How about if Georgia is the first one that has one? Like, how awesome would that be? So hope. There is hope out there. I want to say that. It's very inspiring.
What do you think of the strategy and how it may backfire of calling the Georgia state election fraudulent by the president and others, thus potentially demotivate? I mean, you've seen Georgia voters basically question, why should we go vote again if the election system is broken? Do you think there's any? Do you think that depresses Republican?
I think Trump is trying to snatch defeat out of the hands.
He certainly is.
Which is
such an
nice.
idiot. Well, because he doesn't care about the Senate. He doesn't care about anything.
Well, let's be clear. He doesn't care about anything. Right.
Yeah.
Pete, I've always, one of the constants in our professional relationship is I will not opine on things. I just don't know the answer to your question. I don't know if it's going to depress the vote enough. I don't know if they even care. I don't know. Right. I don't run those people.
Well, there's no way to really know the answer. It's basically you live in Georgia. You know a lot of people. What have you heard, kind of thing.
But I am hoping very much that Trump depresses the vote just enough. I mean, to bring us home. He's certainly trying. But that's just as we end 2020, as we end this year. So you and I laughed about the fact that my governor. And now I'm talking as a citizen, not a professor of law at Georgia State. We laughed about how our governor ran a campaign ad where he was pointing a rifle. He had a rifle and he was interviewing his daughter's date and basically telling his daughter's date, I'm going to blow your head off if you mistreat my daughter. There were so many things wrong with that ad, right? But he wins anyway, right? I mean, he wins. And he could not have been more in Trump's lap, and he could not be a stronger supporter of Trump. And then he does the right thing. In this election cycle. And then Trump totally disowns him and takes him down. And I don't know how much more proof anyone needs that Donald Trump is a one-off, singular threat, narcissist, sociopath. I mean, it's just, circling back to your question a couple questions ago, I don't understand the Republican Party.
Well, yeah, but one more. You've just brought up one more question. You're talking about Brian Kemp and his loyalty to Trump and how Trump has now thrown him under the bus. I mean, he's done this with people throughout his life, including long before he became president. And, of course, his first attorney general, Jeff Sessions. So I do have to ask you, what about Bill Barr? What about Bill Barr's role in this election? Yeah. And what about the fact that now Trump is threatening to fire Bill Barr, who has destroyed his whatever was left of his own reputation? It's all destroyed for what he has done as attorney general, and now Trump's thrown him in the garbage too.
So Barr did not support Trump's claims of election fraud, which is why Trump is mad at Barr.
Right.
He tweeted out some bad things about Barr. I don't know if he's going to. I mean, he
also didn't arrest Obama and Biden and Hillary Clinton, which makes him mad too. I mean, really, he didn't pursue those cases.
This is what's going to happen with Bill Barr, and I'm telling you now that if in fact this happens, I'm going to be screaming on your show very loudly.
Great.
On your podcast.
What?
So my prediction is, I have no idea if he's going to be fired or not, because January 20th, and what's the point? But there will come a point in time when Bill Barr says, I guarantee this, the reason I did what I did was somebody had to be attorney general. And I thought I would serve the American people better by being a counterweight to Trump than would be an attorney general who would have done his bidding. And remember, folks, he's going to say, remember, when he made his claims of election fraud, I did not, I said no, I didn't join that. So I was just there to fight for the American people because someone had to be. That's what he's going to say. And when he says that, we should list a whole bunch of things that he did in both his stints.
Yep.
Of Attorney General.
It won't work.
That are heinous.
Yep.
And the last one is, by the way, I mean, everyone who knows you and me knows my views on Iran-Contra. But Pete, this rush to execute, this isn't Barr's decision necessarily, although maybe it is, I don't know. But this rush of Trump and Barr, whoever it is, to execute these federal prisoners.
Yes, I'm glad you brought it up.
It's just so fucking ugly.
So gross.
I mean, it's
the federal government hadn't executed anybody in years and years. I think it was like 17, 20 years.
Yeah, a long time.
And he's trying to kill as many people on death row in December as he can.
It's like spite. It's like spite.
It's
but I
disgusting.
do want to remind everybody that shortly after becoming Attorney General for the second time, Bill Barr went to Notre Dame and said, there are no ethics separate from faith, and what's destroying our culture is secularism.
Mm-hmm.
And I will, unless he walked that back, which whenever, I will never forget. That's
I'm going to try to find that audio.
Sin. It's an unforgivable sin, Pete, to suggest that unless you believe in God, you don't have ethics and principles. It's unforgivable. I mean, it's just unforgivable. I can't even talk.
I could not agree more, and I'm glad that you brought it up, and it's also a great place to end our conversation on that note, because, yes, he will not be forgotten or forgiven for all the horrific things he has done, Bill Barr, for Donald Trump, but especially here at the end with gleefully seemingly executing these prisoners on death row.
Yes.
Only in America.
Have you no decency? Yes. I mean, that's
of course not.
Line, but,
Thank you, sir.
All right, my friend.
Appreciate
Thank you
it
very much.
All right, that is it. My conversation with Eric Segall. He, of course, is on Twitter at eSpinSegall. His podcast now is up to 20 episodes. It's called Supreme Myths. Thank you for joining me today. Join me and the stand-up community this Thursday night and every Thursday night now at 8 East and anytime on the Discord platform where folks are always chatting away. You're never alone if you're part of the stand-up community. Because while this podcast is, in fact, free, it is not cheap. So please sign up for a paid subscription now for as little as $5. Go to patreon.com/PeteDominic or the paid subscription link in the show notes. Gotta go. Love you. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think your driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a hole